All right, this is our second video of behavior as communication. Um, this one we're going to focus on the principles and concepts in ABA and positive behavior supports. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the ABCs of behavior. So you've probably heard of these before if you've taken psychology classes as undergrads, or if you've worked in ABA types of settings as an RBT. So let's talk about it. The first, it's a three contingency relationship between all aspects of behavior according to behaviorists. And the first is the antecedent. And the antecedent is what happens right before the behavior occurs. So let's talk a little more about antecedents. Okay. So an antecedent is the first step in the chain of behavior. The antecedent is what occurs directly before the behavior. And it's sometimes called the trigger. Sometimes it's called a slow trigger. Sometimes it's called a fast trigger, depending. But it does occur right before the behavior occurs. Oftentimes manipulating the antecedent can change the behavior that follows. So if we're presenting kids with a task that's too difficult and that triggers a behavior, then possibly we can redo the task so that it's a little bit less challenging for them, or they feel more supported during the challenging behavior, or somehow making changes to what occurs right before the behavior can often minimize behavioral episodes. The next part of our three-term contingency is the actual behavior. So the clinical definition of behavior is movement regardless of scale. Hence the phase, displacement, and space through time, in addition to excluding all states of the organism. And so really behavior is just what we can observe and what we can measure. So it's things people do. There's two types of behavior, according to a behaviorist. There's respondent behavior, which is oftentimes like reflexes. So it's behavior that, or behaviors that you may not have full control over. So how you respond to a bee flying in front of your face, or those types of things are often reflex types of behavior. Other types of behavior are called operant behavior, and operant behavior are behaviors that we typically have control over. So behaviors that are learned or that are somehow considered volitional. So we do it probably because of a history of either reinforcement. So that would make us continue the behavior to happen again because it was reinforced, or we no longer do a behavior based because it was punished, or we did not receive access to a reinforcer. So respondent and operant behavior. The last part of the behavior three-term contingency is the consequence. And the consequence isn't, sometimes people misunderstand this word and they think it's how much the child got in trouble, like what was the consequence. But the consequence is actually simply just what happened after the behavior occurred. So we tend to think of this term as bad, like what's the consequence for your actions, but actually it's just what happens. So sometimes, here's two examples. Jake screams, which is the behavior, and starts tearing his paper, also behavior, when it's time for math. So that would be the antecedent. And then the prince gets sent to the principal's office. So the antecedent would simply be getting sent to the principal's office. We don't know if it's reinforced the behavior, if it's punished the behavior at this point. It's simply what happened after the behavior, which was screaming and tearing paper. Another example is Susie calls an aide a name, and the aide and the teacher reprimand her. So we might think that, oh, this consequence, is a punisher because we're reprimanding her. But in fact, it might actually be a reinforcer because the purpose or the function of the child's behavior may have been to get attention, either positive or negative attention. So what we see possibly sometimes as punishment procedures are actually serve as reinforcement. So we don't know that though, unless we do some detective work to figure out what might be going on in the child's behavior. So consequences are very powerful. Manipulating the consequence can change behavior in terms of how we respond to behaviors. If we reinforce behaviors, if we punish behaviors, if we try to extinguish behaviors, the way we react to a child's behavior oftentimes will change the behavior because they may no longer have access to what they're trying to have access to. They might no longer get attention the way they wanted to get attention. They may no longer escape a task like they did in the past. And so it's a powerful area to manipulate and change. So the consequence and the antecedent are places where we will look to make changes if a behavior is occurring for a child. And oftentimes it's not necessarily a change the child will be making, it's a change that we as the adults around the child will be making. So oftentimes behavior support plans are actually for us and for staff and other teachers and other related service providers. It's oftentimes what we're doing in the environment that's causing the behavior or maintaining the behavior. So oftentimes those plans have little to do with the actual child. It's usually yes. So I've talked a little bit about function of behavior, and this is a big concept in ABA and also in positive behavior supports in terms of understanding what the behavior is communicating. So we talked about behavior being communication. So now we want to understand, well, what are they communicating? And it depends. Behaviorists are a little bit more restrictive in terms of what kids are communicating through their behavior, and they have very specific categories as to what they're communicating, whereas someone who buys in more to PBS or a more general way of looking at behavior might think that they could be, protesting, or they could be communicating lots of different things. So we can understand these functions of behavior being very restricted in these categories, but also understand that there's probably more things you do throughout your day than these 4 areas. So think about that when you're thinking about kids and understanding the function of the behavior. We don't always fall so nicely into these little boxes, but I'll present them. So the first one is access. So oftentimes they'll say that a child is doing or exhibiting a problematic behavior because they want to access something, they want to get something, they want to get an item, they want to get attention, they want to get actual individuals or access to these individuals. So access can be either direct or social. Direct meaning they don't really need another person, they are going to just get the attention or items themselves. Social access is, I need that person to get me the cookie on the cookie jar, in the cookie jar. So they might need social access. So they need someone to get them what they need or to give them the attention they need. So there's also escape and avoidance, and that can be either direct or social, meaning they can directly escape or avoid, and they don't need someone else to help them do it. Other times they might need someone to help them avoid a situation, so they might look for social escape or avoidance. So escape and avoidance is to get out of a task or expectation, and sometimes it's simply to postpone or the start of an undesired activity so that they will eventually do it, but they're doing something else to avoid or escape it. These two, for many years, it was really just those 2 functions of behavior, was either access or escape. Things have been added recently, which I think is good, as we're understanding more kids with disabilities. So the third category is sensory stimulation, also known as automatic positive reinforcement. So the things are occurring or behaviors occurring because of sensory stimulation. So kids might be engaging in certain behavior, not because they want to access attention or individuals or items, or they don't want to escape. They're simply trying to regulate their bodies and to get that sensory stimulation. So behaviors that look odd to us or problematic, look for the function might actually be sensory stimulation. Just depends on the individual. The last one is pain attenuation. So as we learn more about people with disabilities and medical issues that they might have, we understand that a lot of individuals, especially kids with self-injurious types of behaviors, might do things like hit their chest or scream loudly, and the function of their behavior might not be access, escape, or sensory. It might be more of actual response to pain. So the child might be having acid reflux or constipation. Those kind of things are often communicated or told to others through behavior. And so when we look at kids, we always like to rule out to make sure that they're not in pain, that they don't have a medical issue, because we might be trying to change the environment and offer reinforcers and teach communication and do all these things. And really the child's just in pain and actually needs probably medical intervention. So it's important to understand that we want to rule out that that's an issue, because that one will continue to get worse as the pain gets worse, and the behavior will most likely get worse. So a lot of kids who hit themselves, who bite themselves, who hit their heads against the wall, those kind of things are often in response to some kind of pain that's going on in their body. So important to understand that concept. So what's important though is to at least get some idea as to why the behavior might be occurring. Because if you create a plan and just, I don't know, let's try a social story, let's try a token system, let's try this. It's like you're just guessing at stuff. You have no idea what the child's attempting to communicate. And oftentimes you will be wrong, or your intervention might even make things worse. So it's important that you do spend the time to kind of assess the situation, either through a functional behavior assessment or just through observations and looking for patterns and looking for common antecedents and patterns and consequence and those kind of things. Because if you're not sure of the function and you don't have a good idea of what it might be, then creating strategies or manipulating the antecedent consequence isn't going to do much good, because you don't actually know what the child's trying to tell you. So this is also the area that relationship-based support comes in so strongly, because if we don't have a relationship with the kids we're working with and we don't understand their life and their challenges and their strengths, and then we're not going to be able to support their behavior, because we don't understand everything that is going on in their life. So this is where I think positive behavior supports is really great, because it really does ask you to look underneath the iceberg and really understand their regulation, does this individual have friends? Like, does this individual have a great way to communicate? Do they have social skills? Do they this and that? And oftentimes that's where you're going to find your answer as to what, the behavior is communicating. So very important to spend the time to understand the behavior. If you don't spend the time, you're just going to be fighting against behavior, and nobody wants to do that. So as you start looking at behavior and trying to understand why it might be occurring, it's important to realize that there's lots of things that can go on in terms of what the function of the behavior is versus what the behavior actually looks like, the topography of the behavior. So don't always assume that if a child runs away that they're trying to escape a task. The child might be running away for many other reasons. They might be doing it because you chase them and that's so fun and they want to get your attention. They might do it because they've got a tummy ache and they don't feel good sitting down, or whatever might be going on for the kiddo. So don't assume behaviors that look like each other are actually mean the same thing. So that's when you do have to start doing your detective work, and don't be fooled by kind of obvious looking behaviors. They might not be as obvious as you think. Or if you've tried some interventions that are not working, it's possible that you have not misunderstood the function of the child's behavior or the communication that they're trying to tell you. So it's important to understand what it looks like versus what it might actually be. Once we understand, okay, this is probably what the child's communicating through their behavior, then we obviously want to replace that behavior. We want something that communicates the exact same thing, but in a more appropriate way. So this can be challenging because you're basically teaching kids how to appropriately escape a situation. You're like, no, I don't want to teach them how to appropriately escape the situation. I want them to do their work. I want them to do the therapy with me or whatever. But unfortunately, you have to first replace the behavior before you start shaping the new behavior. So this is a concept that many people don't really, they want to skip this part. And this, I will tell you, is the biggest thing not to skip, is that in order to get a behavior kind of under control or to help understand what's going on, you need to replace it with something that meets the same need, so that you're showing them, you know, I understand you're communicating that you don't want to do this, but there's an easier way to communicate that you don't want to do this, and you'll still not do it. So you do need to teach them how to escape things. I'm not saying they're not ever going to do it, but you do need to start replacing the problematic behavior. So again, our focus should be on teaching appropriate ways of getting their needs met, not necessarily trying to suppress them. If we're simply trying to suppress the behavior, it will get worse. I guarantee you that. A replacement behavior for not complying with adult requests is not compliance. So again, this isn't about compliance. This is simply about replacing the problematic behavior with a behavior that is less problematic. It might not be the desired behavior, and we'll talk about that when we get in class this summer, but it will definitely get us toward the desired behavior. So think of, so what are some things, when considering replacement behaviors, think of what you do in order to avoid or get something. So there are things that people normally do that are not as problematic. So how do people get out of situations? How do people get us attention? How do people, you know, access items that they want in a more appropriate way than kicking, screaming, biting, pushing things over? So hopefully you can think of some appropriate replacement behaviors. And oftentimes the replacement behavior is functional communication. So how can I let someone know I don't want to do this? Or how can I let someone know I need help? Or how can I let someone know I need a break? And so oftentimes the speech pathologist will be in there helping teach functional communication to have them avoid tasks, to have them get attention, to have them do those kind of things. So a lot of your job will be, especially working with kids with ASD, this child doesn't want to do this task. How do I have this child communicate that more appropriately? And so you'll spend a lot of time working on functional behaviors, functional communication training, like asking for help, asking for a break, or protesting, which is an important skill that we all need. So it's obviously important to match the consequence to the function of the behavior. So when looking at consequence changes, we're definitely going to want to make sure that we make some changes there. So if the function of the child's behavior is escape, then the student shouldn't escape unless it's an appropriate behavior, unless they actually use the replacement behavior, like I want a break, or I need help, or I don't want to do this right now. So for example, hitting does not give me a break, but asking appropriately for one does immediately. So even when it's not time for a break, as you're teaching and shaping the new skill, you want to make sure that whatever the replacement behavior you chose, let's say asking for a break, if that child does it instead of hitting, which is a good thing, it's good for them to ask for a break instead of hitting, then they immediately get a break. So hopefully over time, the child's going to learn that I can ask for a break instead of doing all this hitting and all this other stuff that gets me all sweaty and gets me in trouble. I can ask for a break and they'll give me one. Wow, communication works. So hopefully that's the goal there. So another example, if the function is to gain something, only appropriate behaviors gain access to the item, not inappropriate ones. So tantrums don't get me cookies, but cooperating in the store gets me one when I get back to the car. So this will take consistency, a lot of making sure we're not reinforcing, even if it's a day that we're tired or that we're wanting to move things faster. So we have to be consistent with replacement behaviors, because as soon as that kid gets that cookie for after a tantrum, then we're right back almost to square one in terms of replacing that behavior. So it's tough. This is tough work, but once you have a good plan and you know that you're actually teaching kids skills instead of just suppressing their behavior, you're teaching them communication skills, which is awesome, then that'll hopefully keep your motivation up to be consistent and to maintain that kind of work, because it does take a while to shape and change behavior. So our goal, we want to increase appropriate behavior and at the same time, consequently, decrease the inappropriate behavior. So when you're tracking behavior, you're going to be tracking the problematic behavior. Oh, look at that. It's time for me to update. You're going to be tracking the problematic behavior, and then you're also going to be tracking the replacement behavior. And obviously you want the replacement behavior to go up and you want the problematic behavior to go down. So if you're not seeing that in your data, and then I would reassess your intervention, because most likely something's going wrong in terms of either it's not being implemented consistently or with fidelity, or it's not being implemented across environments. Something might be going on, but you do want to make sure you're tracking both behaviors to make sure that the inappropriate behavior is going down and the replacement behavior is going up. And then we want to focus on teaching the new skills and not necessarily suppressing behavior, because that doesn't work. Suppression does not work. It usually just comes back even worse. So we definitely want to make sure that we're teaching skills and our focus is there, and not hoping, but knowing the behavior will decrease because we're giving them new skills. Okay. So the purpose of our work is not necessarily to modify behavior or to compliance train. Our job is to teach new skills and to provide reinforcement to have those skills stick and maintain those skills. So in the next section, the next video, we're going to talk about some powerful behavior change procedures like reinforcement, some other ones, extinction and punishment, and they'll give you some ideas about things to actually do with kiddos when you're seeing these problematic behaviors. So I'll see you in the next presentation.